But I went back to work a little bit earlier. INFAT was going through a tough time when they were losing a lot of experienced staff to other departments, and so they wanted to be more friendly towards working mothers. So I was able to go back for 3 days a week, and I had a really supportive manager, and I shared a job with another working mother. We were the first woman to do this at mid-level, so it's now quite normal, but at that stage in my career we were one of the first, but it worked really well. We shared the work, and we also shared the international travel and meetings, so I really enjoyed that time. I was then asked to go back to China, this time to Shanghai as Consul General. So that's me looking very young. This was my first formal leadership job, and I had to be persuaded to do the role because I thought, oh no, I couldn't possibly be a Consul General. You have to be old and have grey hair to do the role. And I wasn't sure if I could do a busy job with a young family, but I eventually said yes, and I became the first New Zealand Chinese to head a diplomatic post for New Zealand. That's my son at the time, he's now 19. I had to learn really quickly about managing teams and budgets while representing my country. And you know, as a new leader, of course, I made a lot of mistakes, a lot. And one of the things I had to do was to stop listening to that voice in my head telling me that I was really useless, that I'd never make a good leader. Do you have those voices in your head that are really, that can really drown you, that can really drag you down, right? Sometimes those voices are wrong, and you have to say, I'm not going to listen to that. So when I make a mistake now, instead of beating myself up or blaming someone else, I stop and think, what should I have done in this instance? How can I learn from this experience? It was a mistake, but you can always learn from a mistake and think about how you might do something differently. So that's another of my approaches. I tell my staff it's okay to make mistakes because that's actually how I learn best. If I don't make mistakes, then I don't change the way I do things. So I like being able to make people feel safe. Of course, you don't want to be making mistakes, but it's also the worst thing someone can do is not learn from a mistake. I think that's actually the biggest mistake you can make. One thing I also had to learn from this time was to have difficult conversations with staff members who were not performing. I don't want to be a mean boss, but I also didn't want to be one of those bosses where everything's nice, everything's okay, because in the real world that's not the case. And if you try to avoid a problem, I find usually it can get bigger and bigger. So I had to learn how to have honest conversations with my staff about how they could improve before it was too late. So I see that as a learning experience both for them and for me, that it's okay to have those direct, honest, difficult conversations. After Shanghai, I then returned to Wellington. How many of you went on the cable car? Yeah. My house is right at the top, so I walk in the mornings. I walk downhill, but after work, I get the cable car home. So I went back to INFAT again as a part-time employee. My son had started school by then, so instead of working 3 days a week, I worked Monday to Friday, but shorter hours, so I could drop him off and come up afterwards. So I worked 9 till 3. This time I didn't have such a supportive manager, and he used to make comments all the time about how I would leave at the end of the day and I hadn't finished my tasks, and so I had to tell him, you know, it's better than having no one to do the job at all. And as an experienced officer part-time, I actually could get more done than a full-time inexperienced staff member. But you know, it makes a real difference if you don't feel like your boss has got your back and that they're supporting you and working with you to try and achieve things. Anyway, I was then posted back to China for the third time, this time to the New Zealand Embassy in Beijing again. I arrived just as the Beijing Olympics were starting, so this is their fantastic new stadium. The role I had this time was the deputy ambassador, and boy, this is a really demanding role. It's a very busy environment for those of you who've had to deal with China. You know, it's a big country. We have a lot of interests, and there's a lot to manage. In the New Zealand system, I think it is now our biggest embassy in the world. And as a deputy, you have to manage up, you have to manage your boss, and you have to manage down. So I had a really big team of staff. And then you had to manage sideways because there's a lot of New Zealand government departments also in the embassy. And I kind of thought of that time like being an air traffic controller. You know, you have to keep all the planes flying, and you have to help them take off and land, and you have to make sure they don't crash into each other, and that everything's really coordinated. And it was that kind of role. And during that time, I also, because it was so busy, I learned a lot about strategic leadership, being really clear about your goals and your priorities and what you should be doing and what you don't want to spend time doing. I also spent a lot of time on people leadership. I had a good team, they were excellent, but I had to make sure that they felt well supported and that they were also growing and developing. So for the newer staff, I had to put time in them to show them how to operate in China, what's the protocol, how do you do reporting. So there was a lot of spending time and showing them. And then for more experienced staff, I had to think about how can I keep them challenged and motivated? How do I keep growing them? And so you have to give them what I call stretch tasks, things that keep them extended and developing new skills, because what you don't want is a really good staff member who is bored. That's the kind of worst situation that you are in. And I remember sometimes we were so busy, and being a people leader, having to keep the staff motivated each day. And there was one day when we had our Prime Minister visiting, and I had one staff member, she locked herself in the women's toilets and she wouldn't come out because she was so nervous and so exhausted. She had to interpret for our Prime Minister and for President Xi Jinping. And I remember banging on that door and talking to her for an hour to get her to come out and explaining to her why we needed her and why we needed her to just keep going. That was, I still remember to this day. She did really well in the end, but you know, as a leader, you just, it's like sending your troops into battle, like Winston Churchill. You know, you have to send your troops out there, and you have to make them feel confident and able to do the job. So that's our Prime Minister at the time, and that's my son having a chat to him. The other tough thing was MFAT was being restructured, so we were cutting staff numbers. So I had to tell some staff that they didn't have a job anymore, and that was really hard. I remember having to go home, and some days I would just be so numb. I just couldn't talk to anyone when I got home. I couldn't eat. It was really challenging, but you know, when you're a leader, sometimes you have to do these really hard things, and if you believe in the organisation, sometimes you just have to implement things things that you might not personally agree with, but it is part of being, you know, a manager. But I believe you can do it with compassion, and I always try really hard to tell people it was nothing to do with them, it wasn't their fault, you know, it wasn't that they didn't work hard, it was just simply a decision by head office that there were too many people doing certain roles. But that was a really challenging part of my job. I think, you know, even though it was really challenging time, it was also a really rewarding time for me because it was so difficult. I found that I learnt a lot, and I found, despite all the difficult tasks, I really enjoyed leading people and growing them and building different teams and getting the teams to achieve whatever our goal was. And it was the first time I really felt like I was in the right, you know, driving in the right lane at the right speed. Then I returned to Wellington after Beijing, and I worked for the Minister of Foreign Affairs as his senior private secretary. So I don't know if you recognise this building. Yeah, the Beehive. So my office, because he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, we were on the seventh floor. And the irony of that building is, the more senior the minister, the higher you are. But the building, the rooms get smaller and smaller. So it's quite a funny office to work in. But it's a really exciting role, working with the minister. You know, you travel, you get to meet with world leaders. It can also be quite a powerful role as private secretary, because you manage the minister's time and you can control who has access to him and who he can see, and you can see and hear a lot of sensitive information. You know, sometimes he would call in our vice minister and tell him off, and so I'd be sitting there listening, and of course I can't tell anyone all this. But I was very clear, I didn't want to play power games. You know, although I had the power, I didn't want to play politics. And what I wanted to do was just to do the job honestly, with integrity, and just to find ways to achieve what the minister wanted, but at the same time supporting my MFAT colleagues in their dealings with him, because there are times when it is quite difficult. And you know, it makes you think about what values you have. When you do a job, what are the kind of key principles that you want to live by, and then you want others to do the same. So for me, respect is an important value. It means respecting others and being respectful in all my dealings with them, whether they're a president of a country or whether they're the office cleaner. I believe that everyone deserves our respect, and so for my staff, I also have those same expectations of them. So, and you know, in the Foreign Ministry, our jobs, we never stay in one place. So after this, I was asked to go on a fourth posting, and I said, I don't want to go back to China for a fourth time. I want to see something different. So I applied and got appointed to my current role as ambassador to ASEAN in Jakarta. So here I am. Still feels very new because I'm still learning about ASEAN and all its meetings, and there's a lot of meetings. But I'm really enjoying the challenge of learning about this role, and I lead a really enthusiastic and committed team, and I'm enjoying living in Indonesia, and I get to travel around the Southeast Asian region, but it is still very new to me. So, just in terms of all my roles, you know, even though some of them were in the same country, I hope that you can see that each time I developed new skills and I gained new experiences, and it's those different experiences and working with different teams of people in different situations that have shaped me as a leader, and that's what makes me unique, and that's what will make Adelina different and you different. So getting back to my earlier point about what a leader looks like, you don't have to look like a leader in the traditional sense, you know, where you come from the right background and go to the right schools, or speak a certain way, or lead in a certain way. And actually, as I mentioned, in today's world, where there's a lot of change and there's a need for a new kind of leader, the kind of traditional leader where you have someone at the top and controls everything doesn't actually move, doesn't actually work anymore, because the world is moving too fast, and to have everything in one person is too risky. So, you know, what does work are leaders who can build successful teams and can train and empower those people to do the jobs. So what's my approach to leadership? I wanted to cover some key points. So I mentioned strategic leadership. It's important to me that my team understand the vision and the objectives of what we are trying to achieve. So one of my tasks this year with my new team is to get them to set some goals for our team, but also personal goals for themselves, and to think about why they are doing something. Because working harder isn't the answer. You can spend hours and hours on a project, but if you aren't clear why you're going to achieve it, no one else is going to understand it, and the risk is it just becomes a wasted effort. The other thing is having diverse teams. I really like having different people on my team. If I only have people who are just like me and agree with me all the time, that would be, you know, life would be easier. But I don't believe we grow as a team if that's the case. We wouldn't have any new ideas. No one would say, maybe we should try doing this a different way. So having a diverse team can be challenging, but it also has advantages. But having different people means, as a leader, you also have to make sure that people feel like they belong, that if you're slightly different or not from that main group, you need to build that sense that everyone has a place in that team so that they can get along. And people can be different in terms of ethnic background or education or socioeconomic status. They can also be quite different in terms of the way they think. Do you know the term introverts and extroverts? Yeah. Well, I had a staff member who was an extreme introvert. She was really smart, but she was really quiet, and she didn't always want to be with people. And when she was under stress, she withdrew from herself, and she wouldn't talk to anyone. She would just sit in front of the computer and work really hard. And then meanwhile, I had another staff member who was a real extrovert, and she wanted to be near people. And when she was stressed, she talked a lot. And so you can imagine the two of them, when you put them together, it was never going to work. So, you know, I had to find a way of managing these two different personalities when we were working on a big project, but they both had really important skills and can contribute. So as a leader, you just have to find a way for that to work, and so we managed it, and we did really well, and they both made really valuable contributions to the projects we were working on. The third aspect for me is spending time with your staff. I think time is possibly one of the most valuable things you can give to a staff member. I don't know if you've had one of those managers who's always really busy, you know, no matter what they do, and you don't want to bother them. And when you want to ask them a question, they go, "Oh, not now, I'm too busy." Have you had one of those bosses before, you know, and then you just think it's never a good time to ask them, so you never ask them anything. But you know, if you don't make yourself available to staff, they won't tell you about the problems or issues or their ideas. And if you don't get to know them properly, how can you help grow and develop them? So, you know, setting time aside each day or each week or each month with your staff members, you know, of course newer ones need more time and more experienced ones need less time, but I find giving them time is a really useful tool for me as a manager. And also time with yourself. Don't forget to give that time too when you're busy. You know, I need time to recharge my own batteries, as we say. It also sends a message to staff that how you expect them to be able to balance, you know, in their life. And it's not healthy for someone who is just in the office for 12 hours a day, every day. And the other approach I've had to learn is just to say yes when people ask me and give me opportunities. When I started saying yes to opportunities, I found I got more and more opportunities. But you know, for me it was a matter of confidence. There's a statistic that says women don't apply for a job unless they think they can meet 90% of the criteria. This is in the Harvard Business Review. And for men, if they see a job and they think they can do 60%, they will apply for it. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's the case for Asian people, because we can be quite perfectionists and we think we're not going to apply for that job because we can't do 100% of it or 110% of it. And we go, you know, and when we're also taught to be humble. And so if someone offers us a job opportunity, we go, no, that's not me, I'm not good enough, you know, why not someone else? And so I tell myself it's not a matter of whether you're good enough or not to be a leader. It's about asking yourself, how can I help others reach their potential? What can I do to make the world a better place? You know, so say yes and see what happens. You might be surprised. And my last point is mentoring. Do you know this term, mentor? Are you familiar with it? Okay. Having a mentor has been a key factor in my career. Because I came from such a different background from many of my colleagues, having an older colleague who I trusted, who helped guide me along the way was really valuable. He helped me understand, you know, the social codes, and you know, in every organisation there are unwritten rules about how you operate, and they're never written down, but everyone seems to know them. And so having a mentor who's been in the system a long time can help you understand those unwritten rules. And he also introduced me to key people and encouraged me to keep going whenever I felt quite down. I also have another mentor from outside, in fact. He's very experienced in the business sector and leading big teams, and he, you know, I learn different things from him, but he's also really helpful in guiding me, and he never gives me the answers, which sometimes I get annoyed about, but what he does is he helps me find the answers for myself. So think about who could act as a mentor in your life if you don't have one. I also mentor other people, and it's a chance for me to give back. But I've also found, as I've been mentoring a younger person, that I also learn more about myself and as part of his growth journey. So think about doing both, having a mentor and also mentoring others. So to finish, if I ask you again, what does a leader look like? You know, how about this? Do you know who she is? That's the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Yeah, she's a woman. She's 37 years old, and she's just had a baby, so she's just become a mother. That's her baby at the UN General Assembly, because she's still feeding the child. She needs the baby with her. So the Prime Minister's office now has lots of baby gear. You know, so that's a different kind of leader. And how about this? You know, what a fantastic leader, eh? Isn't she? I find her inspirational, and she has her own distinctive style. You know, and you can put your picture in there, right? That's you. So, I guess my message to you is to say yes. You know, if you have those opportunities. Don't be shy, you know, be confident in yourself. So, thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I feel touched because we got the chance to hear from you directly your personal experience. And thank you for being open to us. I think we can see how you have become a great leader, and that enrich hopefully our colleagues here who aspire to be also leaders. I have questions, but I would like to give the opportunity to our colleagues from ASEAN Executive Program. So. I see Jello, Dennis first, and then Jello, and then Pierre, and then Ain. Okay? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 first, and then Hoa. Sorry. Yen. So 5 first.
Good morning, Your Excellency. Thank you for sharing. Hello. I just wish that all of the managers or leaders share your philosophy in leadership. Because it you made us feel comfortable during this. And I think this is quite from the Philippines. And I would say my first question would be, do you have that, because you said that there is a doubt in you the first time because you said you're female and you're young. What was do you have like eureka moment when you said, no, I'm a leader now, like completely a leader, not just leader in my own way, but a leader. And second, my question would be, because you mentioned about being a leader, you have to care about your colleagues, you have to teach them how to balance between work and life. And I had this very intelligent supervisor before. She was, I think she was one of the best managers in our organizations, if I may say. And she was able to delegate tasks and trust us. And I can say I've learned a lot during her tenure as my boss, but it is borderline being a slave driver. So in my perspective, being the slave, I know when I was being a slave, but in your perspective as a leader, especially during your early times, early days as the new leader, were there any chances or situation where you realized, oh, I'm trusting this task too much in these people, I just realized that I'm being a slave driver? And how did you handle those situations? Thank you.
Okay, good question. Thank you, Denise. I just got back from Manila yesterday, so it's great to hear you're from the Philippines. I did. The traffic was probably slightly better than Jakarta. I don't know if I had a eureka moment as a leader. As I said, it's a growth process, but I think there was, when I was in Beijing for the second time, and people started asking me questions on how to do things, and I would give them advice or show them, and I think at that point I realized I can actually do this. That I don't have all the answers, but I feel confident showing them the way, and you know, leading from the front was always really difficult for me. It's one of the things I've had to learn to do public speaking, because I hate it. You know, I'm not unnatural. Some people just love being in front of cameras and crowds, but for me, I didn't. And so there was just a time where I still, you know, even doing that, I enjoyed, you guys are fun, so it's fine, I'm relaxed. But I think it was a time where I finally thought, no, I've got to do this, and I'm just going to deal with it. Then I thought, yes, I'm becoming, you know, it's an important part of being a leader. So I guess that, having to conquer that was important. And then in terms of delegating, I'm probably the opposite to your manager in that I'm by nature, and you know, you know, as a leader, you have to know your strengths and weaknesses. And one of my weaknesses is I'm a perfectionist, and only I can possibly do this job properly. You know, so I micromanage, and I've had to learn to trust my staff. You know, they've been appointed, they're competent. They might be new or young, and they need some training, but they won't learn if I do everything for them, or if they write a report and I rewrite the whole thing. You know, do you remember those times when you work really hard on a report and your manager's just gone and rewritten it, and you think, why should I bother? And so next time you don't, and then the manager will get mad because you didn't do a good job. So it's one of the things I've had to learn, not to micromanage, trust in my staff and their ability. So, you know, of course I talk to them about deadlines. If it's a big project, I check in with them, how they're going, do they need anything, do they want to talk things through. But I trust them to deliver. And I think it's around expectations. If you expect someone to fail, they probably will. If you expect them to achieve and succeed, then they probably will too, because you know, people are quite sensitive and they will get the message that you're giving them. So so delegation, I am always very careful to delegate tasks, but I try and match them to the ability of the staff member. But it's also important, you know, that's why you need work meetings, and so I have to see where the pressure points are. So if I think Denise is really busy, she's got 5 things to do, and someone else is not so busy, then I can move the task. So that's also part of the role of the leader, having that overall situational awareness. So when I talked about air traffic control, you know, I need to know if there's a plane about to crash, and meanwhile there's another plane sitting there empty, you know, and so I can move that task, or I can get you more help. But you know, there are things that can be done to manage workflows.
So, as a leader, or in your current situation now, how did you push forward and become a more interpersonal being? And how were you able to manage your quietness and your shyness to touch other people? And my second question is, you mentioned a lot about saying yes. So when will you, or how do you know when to say yes and when to say no? Especially when it comes to tasks and when it comes to responsibilities. So that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, J-Lo. One of the things I do early on when I have a new team, we have a fun sort of day where we get to know each other, and to help me, we sort of get everyone to stand in a line, and so the real extroverts stand at this end and the real introverts stand at the other end, and you'll find most people are kind of near the middle, but slightly extrovert or slightly introvert, but occasionally you get those extremes, and I'm kind of an extroverted introvert, but so when I say introvert, it means I get my energy from being alone. I need that time on my own, whereas extroverts get their energy from being around people, and they always need to be around people. So I like being with people, but I also need to take time out. So I think once you understand who you are as a person and you know where your staff members are, you're just much better able to manage that. So I'll say to my team, you know, in the morning, this is time for you. You can come and ask, and we talk. But you know, for a couple of hours in the afternoon, I need you to leave me alone because that's where I do my thinking, or I need space. So having that, once I've had that time, I'm fine to go back. But if you give me 3 days when I'm with people the whole time, you know, I feel like I'm gonna explode. So it's being self-aware and being able to manage that. And you know, you there's always places you can go to find time to be on your own. But it's a matter of making that time. Otherwise, I get really cranky and I get irritable, and my staff know it. And then in terms of your question about saying, when I say yes, I mean to opportunities. When you've been given a chance to lead, yes, I was going to talk about saying no, but yes, sometimes you have to say no when people want to give you more and more to do. And so that's what I mean by strategic leadership. You have to be clear about what you are doing and why you are doing it. And that helps me. That gives me the framework to say to my boss, no, I'm not going to go to this meeting. I'm sorry. You know, it's not a priority for us. Can you find someone else? Because otherwise I just will say yes all the time to tasks and you'll just get drowned, and that's of no good to anyone. So you're right to point that out. When I'm saying yes, I mean for those big opportunities where you think you might not be good enough or they're not for you. But once you're a manager, or even in your current jobs, learning how to say no is also important. You know, the Chinese have this great saying, to the competent, more work is given. You know, and it's often true. As a boss, I think, J-Lo, he's really good. I'll give him this, and I'll also give him this because I know he'll do it, and I'll give him this. And so you have to be really careful not to overload your good staff. So that's also an important lesson.
Testing. Good morning. First thing first, I would like to say thank you for 3 things. First was the treat at your house. You show us great hospitality. Second was the trip to New Zealand. I think it would not have been possible without your assistance. And third, for today's speech. So going to my question, there are 2. My first question is that I realized when you begin the presentation, your idols were mostly Caucasians. So having spent a large part of your career in China, do you feel that leadership in European countries, or the Caucasian style of leadership, is quite different from the Asian leadership? And if yes, then could you share with us how Asian leadership is different? And for the second question is, I think maybe 20 years down the road, in another setting, there might be somebody presenting and showing your face as their idol. Then may I know what kind of message would you want to give young, especially females out there who put career over family? What kind of advice would you give them? Thank you.
Thank you, and it was great to have you all as guests in my home. It was a really fun evening. Yeah, I purposely put up those idols because growing up, they were the kind of only leaders that I knew of. You know, and at the time, the media was, for growing up in New Zealand, it's dominated by the Western media. So those are the kind of faces and voices that you hear about and that you learn about. Having lived in Asia, I've seen different kinds of leadership styles in action. I learned a lot from living in China. There are a lot of women, particularly business leaders, who are extraordinary and who it's not always easy for them. They have to compete with a whole lot of priorities, and it's still very. I think Asia is still very much a male-dominated world. Actually, but the world is actually. I mean, you know, the United States has still not had a female president. So, you know, overall, female leaders are quite rare, and I think so. It's really important for us to support them and to back them. I think sometimes we can be really tough on women leaders, so you know they can be really criticised. And if you think of the women leaders, people tend to criticise them for the way they look, for the way they dress, in a way men are never criticised. So I think that's really important that we support them as people. Yeah, and so your other question about female leaders and career, you know, it's whatever people choose. Some women are going to choose career, some women are going to choose families, some like me, trying to have both, and whatever they choose, it's their decision, and you know, we can really help by supporting them. And so I mentioned our Prime Minister, she's got a baby, so you know, we really want to help her make this work. She's the only second leader in the world ever to give birth in office. The first one was Benazir Bhutto, Prime Minister of Pakistan. So she has, you know, very few role models herself on how to make this work. And as officials, we are really trying hard to support her when she travels, you know, just thinking about what she might need. It might be just a room where she can be, you know, where it's quiet, where she can nurse her baby, being sensitive to the times where she needs to have rest, because she's, you know, if those of you who have new babies, you know, they don't care about your routines, and she was telling us in New York, the baby didn't adjust to time zones, so it was asleep during the day and wanted to play it at night, and she found that really difficult. So just being aware of the challenges, and I talked about two managers I had when I was a part-timer. One was really supportive and he was understanding, and the other one was not so understanding and said I had to be there for a meeting at 8:30 every morning, and I said I couldn't be there at 8:30. The schools don't open until 9, you know. So as a manager, you know, I would encourage you to think about people, and it might not just be working mothers. There could be people in your office who have to deal with elderly parents, or they might have a sick relative. But you know, as you get to know your teams, you'll find people have other commitments, and it may not be forever. But think about how you can support them instead of making it harder for them, because you don't get the best out of them if they don't feel well supported.
Okay, my name is Narain from Malaysia. So the first question I would like to ask is with regard to the things I'm struggling with. For example, how do you envision, how do you articulate or communicate your vision to the subordinate? Sometimes I struggle so much with this. I was like, it's okay, I'll do it myself, because I kind of tend to micromanage because they didn't understand what I'm envisioning about. Yeah. And the second question is with regard, you mentioned that you have witnesses, your excellency, you have witnesses, what not to do, during your early stages. So as a leader, what is your what is a leader is not supposed to do? Thank you.
Okay, yeah. President George Bush Sr., who just passed away, I remember him saying, what is this vision thing? You know, why do we need vision? You know, vision is important because it gives everyone the big picture of what we're trying to do as a team. If you don't have it, everyone just goes off in different directions. But I find if you tell your team the vision, they won't. They don't absorb it. You know, when my boss talks about mission statements, I have to confess, sometimes I don't listen. You know, I'm sort of dreaming. It's only when you have people take part in the building of that vision together with you that they buy into it. You know, if you just tell them, they'll just think, yeah. You know, Pam's just talking again. So we have planning days where we you know, just over fun, food, have a meal, and then we sit down, and I do it with a whiteboard, and I ask my team, you know, what is our operating environment? So for us in a foreign ministry, you know, what is the regional geopolitics? What are the big challenges? And then I ask them, so how do we help New Zealand? You know, what does New Zealand need to do to achieve in this environment? And so you work with the group to build that vision together, and then you'll see the light bulbs go on. And because they've contributed to it, they will own that vision with you. But if you just tell them, I guarantee they'll forget about it in 5 minutes, and they might bring it up when they're going for a job interview or a promotion, and then they read what you said. So that process of building it as part of a team is important. And what was your second question? What not to do? You know, every leader is so different. I don't want to say what not to do, but you know, when I mentioned to you about not feeling that happy in my first time in Beijing, you know, so my philosophy is staff need to feel safe when they come to work. In fact, I want them to feel excited. On Monday morning, like today, I want them to think, yes, I'm going to get to work and I'm going to do all these things because I'm excited about my job. So I try and create that environment. So for me, the worst kind of office I can be in is an unhappy office where the manager is always critical, where you can't get anything right, and you know nothing you do will ever please them. So some people might thrive in that. You know, some people might think, right, I'm going to prove them wrong and I'm going to do this. But for me, I just stop trying. You know, I just think, why bother? I'm just going to look for another job. And you know, in today's world, it's really competitive. People with your skills and talents, there's a lot of companies and government departments. So this is what I mean about an old style manager who leads from the top. People don't like working for that kind of manager anymore. The younger generation want choices. And if you think about your parents, they probably work for the same company or government department from when they started to when they retire. But that's very rare now. People jump. And so as leaders, we have to think about creating work environments that people want to work in, and also where they're able to contribute and be able to feel like they have a meaningful role. So that's for me. I think a leader should never try and create, either deliberately or inadvertently, an unhappy work environment or a work environment that doesn't work for every individual person.
Yeah, my name is Ian. I'm from Vietnam. Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for sharing information with us. About myself, when I visit you and talk with you, I feel really friendly, yeah, and easy to talk. As a leader, you have a lot of things to do, but one day you have only 24 hours, but you spend a lot of time for staff, for yourself, especially when one day you visit your staff who and she talk a lot and a lot, so it costs you a lot of time. So you have 24 hours a day, so how do you deal with the time, or how do you balance the time between the jobs, office and families? And have you ever feel you cannot cover, you want to give up those positions? And when you have a stress, how do you relax? Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. They're really important questions. Yeah, I read some years ago I read Sheryl Sandberg, Lena, and I remember thinking, I can't do this. She's Superwoman, and I worked out pretty early on that I can't be Superwoman. And you know, she's great at doing what she does, but that's just not me. I would just probably kill myself in 3 days of exhaustion. So I talked about strategic leadership. So being really clear about what you want to achieve helps me be focused in those 24 hours, and I do carve out time. So time with staff. I'll give each, you know, as I said, it depends on how experienced the staff is. But so if it's a really new staff member, I'd guarantee them at least 1 hour a week, and then maybe a few minutes each day. But that time is for them. And I find if I put in 1 hour, it will save me 20 hours later on. Because if you don't put the time in, they can go off and do all sorts of, go off in the wrong direction, or you know, they feel like they haven't had guidance. So so if you think about it that way, the more time you put in early on, the less time you have to do later on. Because you know, if you're micromanaging, you're guaranteeing that you will always have to put hours in, because you haven't trusted your staff, you haven't trained them, you haven't equipped them. So my diary, I colour code my diary, so staff time will be one colour, and then me time will be another colour. One thing I do, you know, you mentioned I'm approachable. I work hard to be approachable because I want my staff to come to me. But what I don't want is them coming every 5 minutes with a problem. So I do say to them, come, but bring 4 or 5 things. Don't just bring one thing, go away, and then 20 minutes later come back with another. You know, then neither of us can get any work done with the constant interruption. So you have to sort of, you tell them, you know, I had this, I explained to them quite early on about my working style, and then I want to learn about their working style, and then we, you know, like I talked about the introvert and the extrovert, and then we find a way to manage it so it works for everyone. So having set times where they know they can come in with problems generally helps. And then I have to confess, work-life balance, I still don't get it right. You know, last month was just crazy, and I had very little life and a lot of work. And sometimes it just happens, but I try and carve out time early in the morning for myself, you know, and it might be, I like swimming, or I do yoga, and I always like to read the news, what's happened overnight. So the family knows I was going to have an hour to myself. Or sometimes I just want that hour to sleep in. That's okay too. So I find if I don't do it early on in the day, then it doesn't happen, because then after work you're too tired, or you're going out for dinner, or you just want to finish a project. So for me, I find if I don't schedule it, it doesn't happen. So I am quite ruthless about my diary, and I sit down with my EA at the beginning of each week, so she knows, and she knows not to put, you know, things in that time, because that's already, you know, unless we need to move it if it's a really important thing. But that's the routine I try and set up for myself.
We have one more round, if you don't mind. Ambassador, perhaps 3 questions. Yes. So we have Suk from Cambodia. Sorry, Laos. This is Makara from Cambodia. Dr. Jenny from Malaysia. One more. And Floyd from Thailand. Sorry, 3. Okay, we'll see whether we have time later. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your sharing really experience. I have a short question again. You mentioned that you did a lot of mistakes, and how you tell yourself never give up for your mistake? Thank you.
making mistakes. You know, I explained to you I'm a perfectionist. I like to do everything 100%. You know, so it's something I've had to learn. You know, of course, to avoid the mistake is the best thing, right? So preparation, to me, is the best way of preventing mistakes. So thinking ahead before I do something, you know, and saying to myself, so what are the things that could go wrong? And I guess as in disaster response management, you guys do this all the time, right? How, you know, the preparation is such an important part of what you do. But thinking ahead and planning, and then thinking about what to do if a mistake happens. I find it's just best not to let that voice gain hold. Because once that happens, your confidence goes and it's a downward spiral. So preparation and planning, and then also one thing I've learned from our New Zealand police colleagues, after a big project, they have you know, they have a meal and then they have a prize for the person who made the biggest mistake. And it's really funny, so they all laugh about it, and I learned, you know, it's actually for them, it's okay to make that mistake. And then when they laugh about it, you just move on. And so I think that's a really good way of approaching it. But you know, I find if you punish people, when they make a mistake or there's a problem, they're not going to tell you. And then it gets worse, right? Because then it goes boom. And then you're dealing with an even bigger problem. So it's important that people don't bury those mistakes. So if they see how you approach it, they will feel much comfortable, you know. So the staff will say, oh, I'm really sorry, but I did something really bad. And I'll go, okay, you know, first of all, let's fix it. And then we have a talk about, so what could we have done to avoid it next time? It's a learning thing, right?
Hello. Good morning, ambassadors. Yeah. Firstly, I would like to say very thankful for you being today with us again, unending support and continuous support to the young leaders. Yeah. So my question is very simple. Throughout all the session just now, most of the sharing was you've been through the difficulties and challenges. But because throughout my life also I have a lot of challenges, more or less like the others, how to deal with the upward, downward, like left and right, and making a lot of mistakes. But do you
helpful question, Jane. I think it's important to recognize that it's normal to have down times. I can't stand people who are happy all the time because they just cannot be real. You know, we have ups and we have downs. And I think just being aware that you're going through a downtime and then thinking about what strategies work for you. You know, for some people it might be going out with a friend, talking it through. For other people it might be just to have some quiet time on their own. I think what's important is just not to isolate yourself, and I'm not good at asking for help. So again, it's something I've had to think. It's actually good for me to say to someone, and that's where it helps to have someone who you can trust, who might be an older, wiser colleague or a good friend. You know, just to say, hey, this is really difficult. I'm not, you know, I can't. Sometimes just talking to someone gives you better perspective. So I think the worst thing you can do is keep it inside yourself and be isolated, because sometimes the problem gets bigger in your own mind, but actually when you talk to other people and they go, oh yeah, I have the same problem, or, you know, even just to be able to talk it out can help. So think about who you can go to, or, you know, FaceTime if they're not in the same country. But I think you do need those connections. And I went to a talk one time about women leaders, and this woman, she's very senior in the UN system. She talked about the loneliness of women leaders, that for some reason guys, when they're leaders, can just go out and have a drink or hang out with their friends. Women, for some reason, tend to be more isolated for whatever reason, feel like they have to do it on their own. So that's just something to be really aware of.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for your experience sharing for me. It's my question about, this is a bit personal of you, but what is the hardest moment you ever experienced during your work? Is very hardest for you? Thank you.
I mentioned in my talk when I was in Beijing, you know, when INFAC was restructuring and we were cutting staff, and having to tell someone who worked in the office for 20 years that they didn't have a job anymore. That was really, really difficult, and I felt, you know, it was nothing I could do. I really tried to save the job. We tried to find other ways, but it's just, you know, with technology up to that role, you know, you think, well, if they have to hear it, it's best coming from me and not from someone in head office that they don't know. And then thinking and giving them that time to absorb the bad news. So I didn't want to give them too much information because they're not listening, right? They're in shock. And so just giving them that time and then making sure they're okay. And then when they're ready, talking through what other options, you know, can we help them find another job elsewhere? You know, is there opportunity for them to retrain or upskill? But it's always really difficult giving hard news to a staff member. So for me, that's still, I still think of that is a really tough time.
Perhaps we can get sleep at.
Good morning, Excellency dear Ambassador. My name is Sraibet. I'm from Cambodia. Yes, through experience, through your presentation, we know that you have a lot of experiences and you are a highly educated person. That the government of New Zealand has confidence on you to assign you as the General Counsel in the Shanghai in 2005. This is my first question. And as the leader or manager is not difficult, meaning that the task that the manager or leaders is responsible for. And you have mentioned that to achieve the goal of our one organization, we have to explain to make people or staff understand the vision of the organization. And my question is that what is the big challenges that you meet when during you explain the staff or people to understand the vision of the organization? Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So the first question about the New Zealand government and why they chose, you're essentially asking why they chose me for that job. I don't know. When I was asked, I said no the first time because I could think of 3 or 4 people who I thought could do the job better. And it was only after talking to my mentor when he said, well, why can't you do the job? And we actually broke it down. Because I think for me, I just felt overwhelmed about doing this. It just looked really big. And my mentor was quite helpful in breaking up. So what are the parts of the job that are needed? And there were sort of 4 or 5 things. And he said, well, you can do this. You can do this. This one you can do half, but the job will you learn more about it. And then maybe this one you've never done before, but is there a reason why you can't do it? So so I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. But I don't know why. No, actually, I do know why they chose me. I spoke Chinese, which is one of the criteria. I'd worked in China before, and I had led teams. So thinking about it now, actually, I couldn't do 100%. I could probably do, I don't know, 65, 70%. But you know, as I said, women don't want to do the jobs until they think they can do all of it. So the government probably had more confidence in me than I had in me. So it's a lesson, isn't it? That how you see yourself is not always how other people see yourself. So you need to be open to that they may not match. And then this the question about what was it about challenging of getting the staff to understand the vision or why. Yeah, I find people, my colleagues in MFAT, they're really hard workers, and if you give them a task, they'll go away and do it. But as I said, you know, in this modern age, working hard is not enough. You have to work smart, and part of working smart is understanding why you do something. I usually find once I explain that to people, they understand. And then, as I said, if we work through the vision together, they'll understand it even more. And then they what we say, they own the vision themselves. I've generally not found it a challenge. Where I think people don't agree with the vision or they don't embrace it, it may be that the organisation they're not a good fit, or the organisation is not a good fit for them. So, you know, if you're an environmentalist and you work for a coal company, an oil company, you're never going to accept the vision. So, I think, you know, both you and the company have to agree that it's not the right place for you. So that's a decision. So I think when you join an organisation, you expect that their values will mirror your values, or at least a good proportion of it. Otherwise, I think you'd have to think about, are you in the right place at the right time? I don't, does that answer your question? Sorry.
Thank you very much, Excellency. So I guess we should wrap up now. As scheduled, we are going to have something for Ambassador. But first of all, before that, something given to you. On behalf of the AHA Center, as well as my colleagues from the AHA Center Executive Program from the ASEAN countries, we'd like to thank Ambassador for coming here, for sharing your personal journey, becoming the leader, and also for believing in us, in AHA Center since the beginning, investing in this AHA Center Executive Program. I hope that whatever that we have learned from you will be also useful for AHA Center Executive Program colleagues. For me especially, these are great reminders. Things that you said, they also touch very relevant to me, and I would like also to thank you for that. Thank you very much.
To engage with. I can see you were all nodding and excited, and as Adeline says, New Zealand's really committed to the AHA Centre because we do believe in the work you do. It's important, and the work that you do is important in building strength and resilience in the region, because we all benefit, and it's a two-way process, right? We learn as much as you learn from each other, and I think that's another really good philosophy that we should never stop learning, So thank you very much for listening.